Hi, my name is Yasmin Turehi, and this is Gateways to Awakening, where we host one-on-one conversations with leading experts in wellness, well-being, and spirituality. Today, we are talking about Krishnamurti and his teachings. For those of you who don't know him or his work, Krishnamurti was one of the greatest philosophers of the 20th century. Khalil Gibran considered him the manifestation of the God of love. George Bernard Shaw said he is the most beautiful person I have ever met. And today's episode is with Michael Korhnen, who was born in Germany at the end of World War II. Growing up in post-war Germany disillusioned him in regard to social collective efforts. He studied world religions like Taoism, Buddhism, Hinduism, Islam, and more. And in 1966, he discovered the work of Jiddu Krishnamurti, which we'll call JK. It wasn't until early 1971 that he participated in a dialogue meeting of young people with Krishnamurti, JK, in Madras, now Chennai, in South India. He was completely fascinated and enamored by JK's philosophy and his personal experience, and attended his public talks in India, Europe, and California for the next 5 years. Then in 1975, through the recommendation of some friends from Ojai, he assumed the position of chef at the school there, the newly founded Oak Grove School, even though he had never cooked before. And part of his duty as school cook turned out to be preparing luncheons for JK and his guests during the 3-month period that JK stayed in Ojai, California. So he got to know JK in a personal, casual setting, and they became good friends. After JK's passing in February 1986, he started composing a memoir based on his times with the philosopher, and it was a labor of love and was published in 1995 under the title The Kitchen Chronicles, 1001 Lunches with Jiddu Krishnamurti. And Michael has also continued working for the Krishnamurti Foundation of America in various capacities, which is where we met in Ojai at the school. So for the past 20 years, he's actually been the librarian at the Krishnamurti Library in Ojai. So welcome to the show, Michael.
Yeah, thank you.
So Michael, can you kick it off and tell us about Krishnamurti, who he is for those who don't know him?
All right. So Jiddu Krishnamurti was born in 1895 in central South India in a town called Madanapala in Andhra Pradesh. And some years later, his father was a theosophist. And at that time, and even now, the Theosophical Society is headquartered in a city on the east coast of South India called Madras. Now it's called Chennai. At the time, it was called Madras. And there it was that Krishnamurti, age 14, 15, was discovered by a clairvoyant theosophist and determined to be the next world teacher. And so his mother had died some years earlier, and so the head of the Theosophical Society, her name was Annie Besant, she adopted Krishnamurti and his younger brother, Nityananda. They were inseparable. She adopted both of them, and Krishnamurti and his brother were taken to England, to London, and this is pre-World War I, so we're talking about 1910 and 11, and he was prepared for his new role as world teacher, meaning he was taught English, he was taught English manners of eating, behavior, clothing, etc. And so he assumed that role, and they made him the head of a subdivision of the Theosophical Society called the Order of the Star. And the Order of the Star had chapters of followers, usually in the numbers of thousands, in many different countries all over the world. And Krishnamurti and his brother, they traveled from one place to another and held, what would you call it, meetings, gatherings. And so this went on for quite some time until in about 1922, the brother at one of the meetings in Australia became ill with tuberculosis. Because of the illness, they went not via India back to Europe, but went to California, where the place where they went to was recommended as a good place for people suffering with tuberculosis, the brother's illness. So they came to Ojai, which is about 60 miles from Los Angeles, and they stayed in this small town, which is surrounded by mountains and is about 1,000 feet high. And it was good for the brother to be there. It improved his situation. But even so, he died a few years later in 1925 at the age of 27, which was a great shock for Krishnamurti. And Krishnamurti continued his role defined by the Theosophical Society. But he had become very skeptical about a lot of different aspects of the society. And in 1929, at a meeting in Holland, which was the headquarters of the Theosophical Societies, the town called Ommen in Holland, he dissolved the Order of the Star organization that he was the head of and divorced himself from the Theosophical Society. Under the heading of this talk was called "Truth is a Pathless Land," meaning there is no path to truth. And that was one of his key observations and suggestions to people at large. It became the essence of his talks because he continued them talking all over the world, but independently.
Yeah. So, Michael, I want to highlight that because I think the thing that is so interesting about Krishnamurti, I mean, there's so many things, but he was so much in a league of his own in a sense that he didn't follow any dogma and he refused to play the role of a guru and he kind of refused to give any kind of method or process. And so can you say more about this point? Because obviously I think, his upbringing perhaps deterred him from wanting to create some sort of methodology that people could follow, right? Like walking away from Order of the Star and then kind of carving his own path. Can you talk to us about that? Because I think that part to me is so unique. And correct me if I'm wrong, but I vaguely remember researching online that when people try to turn him into a mystic, he was almost like oblivious and almost didn't like that at all. So can you, speak more about that?
Yeah. Well, one of his observations was that all religions of the world claimed to have the truth, to own the truth, to formulate and pass on the truth. His discovery was, which he conveyed, that truth is a living thing, and only each individual human being, by him or herself, can discover this truth for him or herself, but through observation and through what he called choiceless awareness, which means to be aware of all the conscious activity that goes on in one's mind, how one likes and dislikes, judges and condemns, and so on. And the whole point of it was to note and be aware of the fact that we as human beings, wherever we grow up, we are what he called conditioned, meaning programmed. From early on as children, we are told this is right, this is wrong, this is good behavior, bad behavior. And we base our life and actions on these early conditioning factors. And he questions all of that and encourages us to be aware of this conditioning without judging it. That's the important part. Usually we say, oh, I'm angry. Oh, I must not be angry, and then one tries to get rid of anger. But he says, no, don't condemn anger. Look at anger. See where it comes from. Why do you become angry about something? And the same about other factors which are important in our lives, like fear and violence and pleasure and so on, to just be aware of these factors that determine our life and see them for what they are, how they arise, and so on. And also how, because of these different factors, how we belong to a religion, how we belong to a nation, a nationality, and how we are we are attached to our background. And to be aware of that may make it clear that this is a false adjustment, a false attachment.
Yeah, I mean, that's so powerful. And he talks a lot about a mind that is free from conditioning. And, to be honest, when I was diving into some of his books and really considering that point, I think what has been hard for me is to really integrate that mindset into my day-to-day life. I can think about it for a period of time, but then I sort of fall back into older conditioning, right? And I think it's really difficult when we're so integrated into society. So what do you think, and maybe base it on what you've experienced with Krishnamurti, like what do you think is the antidote for having a mind that's free from conditioning? I mean, how do you and your peers and others create that environment?
Well, you see, this is really the difficulty and the uniqueness, as you already pointed out, is Krishnamurti did not offer a method. He felt that a method or even a kind of a goal to be free from this or that may be hindering to be free in a very basic sense. That to be free in the most basic sense requires clear observation and understanding of how the mind functions, the human mind functions, and how our life is determined by this, by our values. Because our religion, our cultural setting determines our values. So to be aware of that, to see that for what it is essential without judging it or trying to get rid of it. You see, that is the difficulty of what Krishnamurti is talking about, that he does not offer a method, and as you also point out, in his talks he encourages people to question what he says, to question, meaning not to totally accept it as a dogma, but to look at it without judgment, without, if I tell you something very factual, oh, today is a nice day, the sun is shining. Well, you can look around and you see, yeah, that's true. In the same way, what he is pointing out, if one looks at that carefully, observes it, one sees, oh, yeah, that's true. And so it's a very subtle thing, and also it is completely dependent on the individual's attitude and activity, and there's no end to it. It's being aware of oneself and one's actions and reactions at all times.
So, Michael, then I want to dig deeper on this, because then would you argue, or would you say that the goal then is to be free? And I'm wondering, like, is that the highest goal for all of us, or is it to be happy? I know that there's a lot of other folks who believe we exist to pursue things to make us happy. But, based on Krishnamurti's work, it feels like the most important thing is to be free. And so maybe the next best question is, what do you think Krishnamurti thought the meaning of life is about?
Well, that's exactly it. As you mentioned, Yasmin, is, to be free. But here comes the big thing. It's not that we become free. We are free from the first moment of our lives. But then we surrender to conditioning, to being. Then we create this structure through memory and knowledge of ourselves. We say, I am that. I had that experience. I studied this, and all that. So that becomes myself, and the whole point of he questions the validity of the self. That the construction of the self is a mental activity, and so there's always, what would you say? There's always a distortion in there, invariably. And to see this, and of course, as one grows up, the self becomes stronger and more pronounced, and it becomes an incredibly important factor in one's life, And so, but with it comes all kinds of difficulties, problems, distortions, and conflict. It's loaded with conflict, you see, and that's the difficulty, to see that the self, the me, is the cause of conflict and fear and anxiety. I don't know if that makes sense or not.
Yeah, no, it makes sense. It makes sense that we're the creators of the self, essentially, right? Which is the personalization, subjectivity of our experience, which creates a lot of the pain and suffering, right? Because there's all these conditions. I think reading some of this work, it's so liberating for me, because if you actually zoom out, and you become this awareness and observe, then you can detach yourself from your construct. Yeah. But there's such a tension there for me, like in terms of the fear that I feel when I detach myself from my life. Then it sort of feels like, nihilism is a really strong word, so it's not quite nihilism, but it just feels like meaningless. There's a sense of meaninglessness. Yeah. So how do you deal with that? Like, how do you kind of detach yourself without losing meaning?
Well,
or maybe you can't.
But life has its own meaning, its own beauty, its own, its own value, and the self sort of denies that in many respects. You know what I mean? Because the value, the self and the me value states, oh, I'm the most important person in the universe, and so the value system is formed on that basis, and that's where the distortion and the difficulty comes in. That I adhere to that, and in a very basic, and you see that one has to keep in mind there are two sort of areas that one keeps that operate. One is a very functional area to survive. You need food, you need shelter, you need all these things. But then, and that's a form of security, of course. But then the psychological security is another thing altogether. One wonders, is there such a thing as a psychological security? Because psychological security refers to the me, the self. And I want to be safe. I want to be totally secure. And of course, there's no such thing. We are born and we die, and that's the very basic fact of human life, is that, and we cannot escape from that. Even though in most societies, death is a horrible thing. And of course, we lose a loved one, and that hurts. There's pain in that, and so on. But on the other hand, that's how life is. Everything has a beginning and an ending, and so to see that clearly is liberating. You see, and not to struggle against it.
Right. Yeah, right. I think, especially in the West, we sort of abhor any kind of ending, and we see it as failure.
Yeah. And so that's such a big factor in our daily living, and but to see clearly the pattern of life and in all areas is something in a way very liberating and beautiful.
Yeah. So, Michael, I want to talk about, obviously you've read probably all of Krishnamurti's books, which there's quite a few.
Yeah.
And yeah, because I think we met at the library in Ojai, and there's just kind of like wall to wall bookcase.
Oh boy, yes.
all the different. Yeah. So I'd love to get a sense from you which book is, or maybe series of books, couple of books, has made the most impact on you, and why?
Well, now you have to keep in mind, I studied the various religions and Taoism and Buddhism. They influenced me and impressed me very much, and then to come upon Krishnamurti, who really sets the human being free. And even, just to give you an example, meditation. Meditation is very important and big in all the religions of some sort, and it's something, and he defines meditation as something very, very extraordinary, that it is not an intellectual affair, but he says, when the heart enters the mind has quite a different quality. It is really then limitless, not only in its capacity to think, to act efficiently, but also in its sense of living in a vast space where you're part of everything. Meditation is the movement of love. This is what he suggests, and which one, I guess, can experience. Anyway, so there is a book. Just when I discovered Krishnamurti, or first met him, it was just briefly before, there was a book that had just come out, and it's still available. It's called The Only Revolution. And it's a book that I read while I was in Almora in India, near the Himalayas. I was staying there. And the book impressed me profoundly. And then not long after that, I met him. And there was, you see, that was the extraordinary thing of meeting Krishnamurti. And that's hard to convey nowadays. I mean, after all, he died 36 years ago. That's quite a while. So he's not alive as a human being anymore, But at that time, when he was alive and he entered the room, here there were 30, 40 young people squatting on the ground, and he entered the room very quietly, almost shyly, and walked to the corner where there was a pillow and a microphone, and he sat down, and he didn't say anything immediately. He just sort of looked at everybody, smiled and nodded a little bit, and then very gently asked, "What shall we talk about?" And then various people had various questions, and he took all of that into account, and a conversation ensued, But the thing was, there was a special emanation of his presence. It was very subtle, and it wasn't a powerful. You know how sometimes a person who has accomplished something or who's famous and has a big position as a president or any of that. It wasn't like that. It was very, very, very subtle. And for me personally, it manifested, and I still think of it that way. It was like a window had been opened in my mind, and suddenly I saw an infinite space of freedom. An infinite space of freedom there that we inhabit as human beings, and that we are part of, and yet we don't see it most of the time, but it's there. We are born free as free human beings, and then of course all the patterns and experiences, all of that conditions us and narrows us down more and more, And so anyways, but there was something unspoken and very subtle, and I would call it love, a feeling of great love and compassion that communicated itself simply through the person. And that was definitely a permanent feature of this man that was so extraordinary. And he never sort of emphasized it and said, "Oh, look at me, I'm full of love," or something. No, that was not the way. It was just a simple, subtle fact. As a flower, you look at a flower and you see the beauty of the flower, and and it's just alive. And then eventually, eventually the flower withers away, And Krishnamurti, he flowered for a long time and very slowly too, you see.
So Michael, I want to ask, since you were the chef, I know this is maybe a little bit frivolous and silly, but I'm curious, what was his kind of favorite dish? What did he like to eat?
Well, he was, he came from a Brahmin family, and Brahmins, the highest class in ancient Indian tradition, they were always very strict vegetarians. So they never ate meat or fish or anything like that. And he was raised that way. So he was actually a lifelong vegetarian. So the food that I prepared was vegetarian food. But he was not nowadays, a lot of vegetarians become what they call vegans, which means they don't eat any eggs or milk or cheese or honey or so, anything that has anything to do with an animal. Well, he did eat eggs and milk and cheese and so on, but he was very aware of what he ate, and so he didn't like very rich food. He, as I said, he ate cheese and so on, but not too much butter or too much cheese or eggs and so on, just in small amounts. And the one thing that he was very careful of, which was interesting for me, was that he didn't like what we call stimulants, like coffee or black tea. He didn't consume those. And on one occasion, I had prepared some what we call brownies, chocolate cookies, and he looked at it and he asked me, "What is this, sir?" And I said, Krishnaji, those are chocolate brownies. And he said, "Oh, no, I won't eat those." And I was really surprised. And I thought, wow, Krishnaji, and he liked sweet things, he liked sweet desserts and all that, ice cream and so on. But he said, "Oh, no, I won't eat that." And I said, "Why, Krishnaji, you like sweet things?" "No," he said, "no, chocolate is a stimulant, and I won't consume stimulants." And it's true. I looked it up, and chocolate is a stimulant like coffee and so on, And so, but apropos, well, he ate vegetarian dishes. He liked most of what I cooked. But on one occasion, he seldom really said, "Oh, this is wonderful," or he never expressed or seldom expressed direct criticism like that, or outright delight of, in something. But on one occasion, he stayed for some years with Mary Zimbalist in Malibu at her house. She hosted him. She was his manager and secretary. But she was gone for some days. And so he said, "Oh, can you make me that soup that you made yesterday? And it's called 7-bean soup." and it's a soup that consisted of seven different types of beans. They were all cooked together, and with vegetables, carrots and bell peppers and onions and so on, and made it into a very delicious soup. And he said, "Can you make some of those for me so I can take them home?" And I said, "Okay, sir." So I made him a couple gallons of that soup, and he took it with him, and he ate that for the next few days. And then I asked him afterwards. I said, "How did it go with the soup?" "Oh," he said, "oh, wonderful, but I still have a gallon jar full."
Oh, wow. That's amazing. Wow. I love it. Yeah, I love it. It's nice to know the human JK as opposed to the philosopher JK, right? Because at the end of the day, we're all human. So, Michael, I wanted
exactly.
I wanted to ask about. There's a couple things that he said in I think his books or maybe discourses that have stayed with me. And one quote in particular is, "It is no measure of health to be well adjusted to a profoundly sick society." And, in his life, he saw so much, right? World War I, World War II, right? And I'm curious, what was his perspective? Obviously, the deconditioning of a mind was his philosophy, which spoke to a lot of concepts of nationalism, right, and holding on to these like personalized ideas of who we are as a race. But yeah, I'm curious, what was his perspective on the world, and like where did he think humanity was going to go?
Well, that was really one of his concerns. He traveled the whole world, and he directly experienced and observed the functions and operations of the various cultures and countries that he visited. And clearly, each culture had its own shortcomings. Each culture fosters values, and each country has engaged in wars, and so on, in violence and so on. All of these things were abhorrent to him. He felt that to kill another human being was the worst sin, the worst thing one could do, And so he was very skeptical about the various societies, even though he lived among them, but he felt what you just quoted, that to be adjusted to a sick society, with all these difficulties, the crimes, the competition, the ruthlessness, when everybody tries to be the number one, and regardless of all the others. You see, that's a thing that disturbed him, and that was one thing that was rooted in the sense of me and self. And that's what he addressed. Can we create, as human beings, a society where there is no competition, no comparison, no endeavor, no crime, no violence, and all that, and a society that doesn't go to war with another one for some reason or other, for territorial gain or some ideological reason. So that was one of his prime concerns overall, and I mean, he stated what I was just saying. He stated this very much in that talk that he gave when he disbanded the Order of the Star in 1929, and he said at the end, he said, "My only concern is to set human beings absolutely free." And and that was his endeavor. Throughout his life, he traveled all over. He gave talks, and he never really adored money. Even though it's a funny thing, he didn't concern himself with money, and yet he didn't have any money. He was dependent on donors. People supporting his work through donations, and we are still in that same league, as it were, because now let's take the Krishnamurti Foundation of America, that runs the school and the center here and the library. Well, we are all non-profit organizations, and we try to survive and make do through donations, through support from people that are interested in the same thing, to make Krishnamurti's work available, and to support that. Yeah.
Yeah, amazing. And we'll include a link at the end of the show for folks who do want to donate. So, Michael, what has surprised you the most on your journey? And if you can answer that, I know it's difficult to answer for JK, but if you could maybe tell us what you think surprised him the most on his journey.
I can't really speak for him in that sense, because he in a certain sense, and apropos book, I want to add this book. It's a diary that he written in the 1960s. It's called Krishnamurti's Notebook, and it's a very personal type book where he really recorded his observations, and his state of mind, and sometimes this very powerful experience of love that he had, and it was all, and ultimately it was he always, that was a kind of contradiction. He said it's beyond words, and yet he was writing about it, So, but even so, some of it is being conveyed, and I think that was for him was that to have a good relationship with people, which didn't always work. He was a human being. He made mistakes, and sometimes some people got mad at him or criticized or judged him. That was not uncommon at all. But if you got to know him just on a very personal level, you could see what a lovely man he was. And the thing that impressed me most, and in a way it's true, it really impressed me, that he had a wonderful sense of humor. And he liked to tell jokes. So at the lunch table, it wasn't uncommon that he told a joke that he had just heard. And often they were very funny and about heaven and hell and whatnot. It was, it was an unusual type of jokes, that he liked to tell, and actually that caused me in a way to write my book, because a lot of people, when they only saw a video of him giving a talk, often they felt he was very very severe and austere, and said, "Why haven't you changed?" and so on, and people. But sometimes during his public talks, he would also tell jokes. Sometimes, and they were kind of funny. He had, as I said, he had a wonderful sense of humor. And during one interview with a British television company, they asked him about. He often emphasized seriousness, what he called seriousness. And the man asked, what is seriousness, sir? And he says, well, seriousness is going to the end of what you are doing, what you are inquiring, your task, and so on, to completing these things that you have started, going to the end. That's seriousness. But, and then he included this, and that I like very much. He said, but seriousness includes humor, the capacity to laugh at yourself about your own endeavors and things, and that was really true. He did laugh about. I remember on one occasion at the lunch table, we were sitting together and we were talking about the foundations and whatnot. And he started laughing, and I said, Krishna, what's so funny? And he said, oh, just this whole circus about this man, meaning himself.
Yeah. Oh, that's amazing I could see it in him and in some of the discourses and conversations, that he's got a very lighthearted, playful sense of self, which to me, is powerful, right? Because I think it is a big cosmic joke,
Indeed,
what we're doing here.
Yeah. No, and I mean, I see that in myself, the things that I do sometimes, and I like this and I like that, and sometimes it's all kind of ironic and contradictory and silly, and or for example, here's another thing that a lot of people, when I discovered that, I was really surprised, and somebody told me before I ever met him on a very personal level, and they said, oh, he likes movies. He goes to the movies, And it turned out, yes, he liked Western, and Clint Eastwood was one of his favorite actors. And then at one point, a lady mentioned to him at the lunch table and said, "But Krishnaji, they shoot each other and there's blood all over." And he said, "Yeah, but they're not really shooting each other, and the blood is just some ketchup."
Amazing. So he's not so strict about everything, right?
No, he was not
amazing.
dogmatic. Actually, here, let me add another thing, Yasmin, because this was a very, very common theme, because, he was very interested in a different type of education, where the teacher and the student had an affectionate relationship of trust, and it wasn't just, the teacher wasn't just an authority, so he emphasized that as important in the educational pattern, and so he wanted the teacher to have a feeling for this young person that just grew up, and not to assert any kind of power over that person. But of course, so he recommended that at the school, which he started here in Ojai, the Oak Grove School, in 1975, and he said, "Yeah, we should all be vegetarian." So that became a topic, But then at one point, I remember there was a discussion about that, and he said, "Look, I'm not advocating vegetarianism. I don't advocate any ism, I'm not dogmatic." And then he gave an example which was kind of thought-provoking. He said, "Look, if you are an Eskimo and you live up in the Arctic North and you have no vegetables, well, what are you going to do? You have to hunt the seal or the fish and eat those. Or if you're a bushman in the Kalahari Desert, what are you going to eat? You have to run after the antelope and eat the antelope, So he wasn't dogmatic in that sense either. You see what I mean? And
right,
yeah, and
he's practical.
yeah. He had a very direct, practical approach to life, and that was very, very strong and powerful.
So, Michael, we are almost at time.
Yeah.
But I wanted to ask one more question. And what do you want to tell our listeners about Krishnamurti, about the work of Krishnamurti, perhaps why you found it so interesting all these years, enough to spend so much of your life, caretaking the center and running the library, right? So what do you want to tell our listeners about that?
Well, again, the thing that impressed me most and stayed with me throughout this, and I think it became sort of very important. And he expressed that, Krishnamurti expressed that when he said, "Nobody can give you the truth." Nobody. And he included himself. He said, "I can't give you the truth. You have to find the truth for yourself, in your own life, in your own mind, in your own thinking, and so on." And now that was one way of expressing it. Then he had another very poetical way of expressing it. He said, "You have to be a light unto yourself. You have to be a light unto yourself. And that light is the law. No other person or agency or religion can give you that light, But of course, then he specified. He said, well, of course you have to obey the laws of the land, and you have to obey the policeman, and all that. But he's not talking about that. He's talking about that ultimate perception of the mind of the human being. That there you have to be a light unto yourself. To be able to observe and see things clearly without judgment, without condemning or giving or forming a dogma.
Yeah. Fascinating, Michael. This was so lovely. Are there any resources that you can point folks to in order to stay in touch with you or learn more about the Ojai Center? Is there a link?
Yeah, there's well. First of all, the foundations worldwide. There are 4 international foundations. The one in India, KFI, and the one in England, which is sort of European, I guess, is called KFT, Krishnamurti Foundation Trust. And in India, they have 5, 6 schools. In England, they have one center and school called Broadwood Park. And then here in America, the KFA, Krishnamurti Foundation of America, operates and runs one school, the Oak Grove School, which now has expanded, and it goes from kindergarten. It's an accredited school, private, not cheap, unfortunately, but it goes from kindergarten all the way through high school. It has over 200 students, which for a school of that size and quality is good, and so the resources are the website, of course, which is kfa.org, and that's where you can get all the information about Krishnamurti, his books, the school, etc. And then, of course, there's the actual center, which is now the library where I work, and that is in the house where Krishnamurti used to live when he came to America, to California and Ojai. That's where he lived, and that's where he passed away 36 years ago. And that has certain opening hours, which sometimes change a bit, and we're open, except Mondays, we're open all day, 10:30 to 2:30, and on the weekends and holidays, it's from 10 to 5. And people can come, and you don't have to make a reservation for that. You just come and have a look around, and we sell the books, and there are the books. And then there's also a great new resource, which is YouTube. You go to YouTube on the computer, and you see J. Krishnamurti, and there are dozens, or maybe even 100 or 200 video recordings of all of his talks.
Yes, and I have watched many of them.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Michael. Thank you so much. And I can also attest to the fact that the Krishnamurti Center in Ojai is spectacular. There's also beautiful tours that you can take, and the outdoor area where there's a garden and all these different plants. It's just, it feels like from another space and time. It's so beautiful. I've been there twice now. Yeah. Well, Michael, thank you so much. Go ahead.
I know I was going to thank you and say it's been a pleasure talking with you. I wish we had more time and I could tell you many more stories.
Oh, yeah. Likewise. We'll have to talk again and dive deeper into some of his other works, because, I think that it could probably take years.
That's very special. We can have a joke session when I tell you a lot of the jokes and stories that Krishnamurti told. But it's a little touchy because it involves heaven and hell, God and the devil, and so on.
Amazing.
So not everybody might be susceptible to that.
Maybe that could be the next book that you write, Michael. the jokes of Krishnamurti.
Well, they're already in my book, so yeah.
Oh, amazing.
But thank you, Yasmin. A pleasure talking with you.
Yeah.
And thank you for inviting me.
For our audience, thanks for joining and for listening. In this episode, we learned about the life of Krishnamurti through the lens of Michael Korhnen. You can tune in to Gateways to Awakening, where we host one-on-one conversations with leading experts in wellness, well-being, and spirituality. Thanks again.